Hey everyone, Tankenstein here. In this video, I'll be reviewing the ZTZ59A, a currently Tier 5 8.0 BR medium tank that exists as a premium vehicle for the Chinese Ground Forces tech tree. In this video, I'll be going over everything that you need to know about it, including its stats, how it plays, its strengths and weaknesses. I'll give some scores in several key areas, and then I'll give my final recommendation and if I feel that this vehicle is worth purchasing or not. As always, please subscribe if you like more content like this, as that would make you a rad Chad. But without further ado, let's get into the video. To start, I'll place its stats here on the side of the screen. Important stats to know are its turret traverse speed, top speed, and reload rate. With that said, let's get into how this tank plays. The ZTZ59A is essentially an upgraded Type 59 tank, which itself is more or less a Chinese clone of the T-54 in 1951 of the Russian Ground Forces tech tree. In fact, with the exception of a 5mm difference in side turret armor, a 1/10 of a second slower reload speed, and an addition of a side skirt, along with some small utility boxes that are randomly placed on this vehicle, the ZTZ59A is essentially an exact clone, at least in terms of looks, when compared to the T-54 in 1951. There are some big internal differences, however, in that the ZTZ59A has a stabilizer, albeit one that is not constantly working, and a laser rangefinder, both of which will help tremendously in allowing you to function well at or beyond 8.0 BR. That said, you still have the same meh but decent maneuverability with a top speed of 50 km per hour and a power to weight ratio of around 14.7 horsepower per ton. This basically means that while you won't be able to keep up with faster mediums around this BR such as the Leopard 1 and especially with light tanks, you will fall more or less in the middle of the pack insofar as movement speed and ability is concerned. This means that you can cap some bases, flank a bit slowly, and can move along with the front lines. Essentially, you'll act as a support, which isn't too big of a deal, being that you will have an excellent HEAT-FS shell that can pen upwards of 390mm of armor and a laser rangefinder as well, the latter of which is fairly uncommon at this BR. This means that you will be able to snipe at long ranges without having very accurate return fire against you, making the ZTZ59A a surprisingly good sniper when not in a full up tier. Luckily, the weaknesses of this vehicle are largely nullified when being in this role, such as its awful turret traverse rate of 10 degrees at best, and that's fully aced crew, middling maneuverability, and sometimes iffy armor. Otherwise, especially in a flanking role, you will find these weaknesses more difficult to conceal, especially in technical maps like those in cities, where fighting can be close in and requires a decent reload rate and a good turret traverse, both of which are somewhat lacking in this vehicle. Further, the ZTZ59A does not have thermals or even night vision, making it very difficult to use in up tiers that happen to also be in night maps. Oh, and one other thing. Remember how I said that the stabilizer doesn't work all the time? Well, it stops when you break 40 km per hour, meaning that any maps with flat, straight terrain will be tricky to use with this vehicle, as you will oftentimes get beyond 40 km per hour, even if just slightly, which will take away one of the most important strengths that this vehicle has. Again, this reinforces that flanking is only a secondary or even tertiary role of this vehicle, though it can certainly work if you manage your speed properly. Now with that said, let's get into its strengths and weaknesses, and first for its strengths, it has a laser rangefinder, which is not exactly common at this BR. Second, it has a mostly working stabilizer. Third, it has a powerful cannon and ammo combination between its HEAT-FS and APDS. It is a very good cannon that can do a lot of things at a lot of ranges. Fourth, it has an HMG on top that can deal with lightly armored ground vehicles and aircraft fairly well. And finally, it has premium RP and Silverline bonuses. And now for its weaknesses, and there are a few more weaknesses than strengths. First, it has a stabilizer that stops working beyond 40 km per hour. If it failed at 45 km per hour, it wouldn't be a big deal, but you hit that spot between 40 and 45 km per hour so often that you will lose your stabilizer often and at important times. Second, again, it has no night vision or thermals. Third, it has a poor turret traverse speed. Oftentimes you will face tanks that have 2 or even 3 times the turret traverse speed that you have. Fourth, it is on the wrong side of average in terms of overall speed, though again it is not downright terrible. For its fifth weakness, while similar tanks around this BR are starting to get into APF SDS shells, the ZTZ59A only has the HEAT-FS and APDS shells insofar as its main shells are concerned. For its sixth weakness, armor is decent, though is not enough to consistently stop anything beyond autocannons. Seventh, it has a mediocre reload speed, and finally, poorly. As with most Soviet-designed tanks, being that this is a clone of the T-54, the gun depression on the ZTZ59A is mediocre, at just -4 degrees. And now for my scores. For armament, I rate this a 7.5 out of 10. The ZTZ59A has a cannon that, only in a few circumstances, will be stopped. Its 390mm of armor pen at max is totally sufficient to deal with most enemies, even from the front, until you reach a full up tier at 9.0 BR, and even still, it can compete. This, combined with the laser rangefinder and surprisingly decent gunner's optics with 7x zoom, gives you an excellent sniper. Its cannon loses points in that it has a mediocre reload rate, it is only 100mm as opposed to 105 or even 120mm, of which are both common cannon sizes around this BR, and that it carries only APDS and HeatFS as your typically viable types of shells that you can use. Other tanks such as the T-55A have APF SDS, even though it is not the greatest in that instance. Now for movement, so basic maneuverability, I give this a 5 out of 10. While definitely not speedy, as its top speed is only about 50 km per hour, and it has a poor reverse speed of 8 km per hour, the ZTZ59A can still move fairly decently. I've noticed that it pivots at slow speeds very well, but aside from that, it isn't anything beyond average. Where it suffers is, again, its top speed and poor turret reverse rate, both of which will limit your use of this vehicle. Now for survivability, I also give this vehicle a 5 out of 10. While the armor can certainly deflect shells every now and again, especially against solid shot APCR and APHE, it will not do the same against HeatFS, most APDS, and APF SDS, all of which are becoming more common at this BR. Still, autocannons from the front and some bomb blasts will not kill you, whereas lesser armored vehicles will have trouble with both of those. Regardless, if a shell does get through, you only have 4 crew members, which when combined with all the other strengths and weaknesses, makes the ZTZ59A feel very average in terms of survivability. Now overall, I give this vehicle a 6 out of 10. The ZTZ59A is a perfectly capable vehicle that has good capabilities overall, especially in terms of its cannon, but is let down by its average maneuverability, survivability, lack of night vision, and the fact that its stabilizer fails at a speed that the tank can reach fairly easily. So that said, for my final recommendation, the ZTZ59A is quite obviously an attempt from Gaijin 2 when combined with the other high-tier premium ground vehicles in the Chinese ground tech tree, such as the excellent WMA 301 and the previously available Type 69-2G and T62 number 545, create a powerful 8.0-ish BR lineup for people to purchase to essentially have a complete lineup without ever having to research a single vehicle. The ZTZ59A is the weak link in that group. It is a perfectly capable vehicle in many regards, but it feels like a T-55A that traded the use of an APF SDS round and night vision for a laser rangefinder and a faulty stabilizer. While good in its own right, mainly in the sniper role, the ZTZ59A feels somewhat average and doesn't feel like a typical high BR premium vehicle. There just isn't anything special about it, outside of its aforementioned laser rangefinder and mostly working stabilizer. Unfortunately, while I think that this vehicle is worth a purchase, I will 100% say that the WMA 301 is a much better purchase than the ZTZ59A, with me only suggesting that you buy the ZTZ59A if you've already purchased the WMA 301. The 301 has Gen 2 thermals, while the ZTZ lacks even night vision. The 301 is much faster, has a much more powerful cannon that can fire APF, SDS, HeatFS, and tandem charge ATGMs, and most importantly, the WMA 301 is a Tier 6 premium vehicle, whereas the ZTZ59A is a Tier 5 vehicle, meaning that the WMA 301 can research through Tier 7 without research penalties, whereas the ZTZ59A can only research through Tier 6 without penalty. The WMA 301 is essentially better in every single way outside of armor, and is currently only 0.3 BR higher at 8.3 BR and only costs 530 GE more, which is absurdly small when considering how much better of a vehicle it is over the ZTZ59A. Even if it was 8.7 BR, I'd still say the same exact thing about the WMA 301 over the 59A. Ultimately, while the ZTZ59A is not a bad vehicle, it is completely overshadowed by the vastly superior WMA 301, and as such, is only a vehicle that I can recommend if you really want to fill out that portion of the Chinese ground tech tree and you already own the WMA 301. With that said, please let me know what your thoughts are about this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe, especially if you'd like more content, but either way, thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you all on the other side. Take care, everyone.